give a warm welcome to Carsten Nicolai, aka Alva Noto. I have to add that it's actually a great honor for me. It took a little while, and I'm very, very happy that we were able to make this happen. So this is very special for me as well. You were producing music under the name Noto and Alva Noto. Maybe you can tell us how you came up with that name and does it stand for something and what's the difference?
Yeah, basically I come from a visual background. I did many years visual arts, and I decided quite late, or I became very interested in music around 95 maybe. Maybe one of the reasons I became so interested in music was from 92 in my hometown in Chemnitz. I was running a kind of club, kind of old factory where we had exhibitions, cinema, parties and so on, and in the same old factory building was my studio. Around this time I realized that everything belongs together in a way. I mean, I really enjoyed basically presenting to the people visual arts in the same way as you have a great party or a concert or some art house cinema stuff. And I think in this time I started getting interested in sound basically. And maybe to show one image, what I found today is very old. This was around this time my equipment.
So this was 1990?
This photo is from 97, but I think it started quite early. I still have all this stuff.
What do we see?
What you see is a bit difficult to see, but it's basically oscillators. The only real instrument is maybe the Akai sampler. Yeah, and I was more interested in frequencies, like how we perceive a frequency and so on. And you can see a little oscilloscope on the right-hand side. I didn't trust the idea of that we just perceive the frequency between 20 and 20k hertz. So I thought, okay, I want to find out if maybe higher frequencies are perceptible, maybe not by hearing, maybe just by feeling it.
And also by visualizing them?
Yeah, that was one of the reasons I started visualizing them, because sometimes I didn't know if I hear them or if I don't, if they're really there or if I just imagine they're there.
So there was kind of a scientific aspect behind it as well?
Yeah, I mean, kind of psychological research as well, like exposing myself to very high frequencies over a long period of time and see how it changes. And
how did it change you?
Yeah. I mean, very simple thing. What was happening actually, that you shift attention to a frequency you normally don't give attention. That you start listening much higher frequencies in a normal environment, for instance. Because our ear and of course our brain is kind of a filter at the same time. So we are kind of concentrate on specific things, what we need to listen to or what we want to listen to. And so I shifted my attention into this quite high frequency ranges, and then I started a little bit getting interested, what does it produce actually? What does it do to me? And it's a great track from Laurie Anderson, where she used one of the synclaviers very early. Actually, in this time, I realized that there's a very high pitch frequency inside, around 11,000 hertz. I felt always very convenient with this high frequency, and I didn't know why. And much later I found out, I grew up with TV in a young age. We looked a lot of TV, and TV was always running, and actually a tube television emits a high frequency constantly. And I connected obviously this high frequency with being home. Like it gave me a kind of
warm feeling.
A kind of warm feeling, even if you think like it's kind of harsh. I underlaid a lot of tracks with this kind of high frequency in order to produce this kind of atmospheric TV situation. Yeah. Of course, until today, I am involving that kind of frequency range. I'm not afraid about going too high or in a way.
So when you can't hear it anymore, you don't have that perception of your ear, you just trying to use different sensations, how you can actually get that frequency into your body, in which way? Or
maybe in studio context and production-wise, these frequencies are mostly disturbing. But for instance, when you play live and you have a great speaker system, then you have so much more options.
Is that also why you work in different fields? I mean, you're on the one hand an artist, you are a musician, even though you always neglect to be called a musician. At least that's what I read. And you're a visual artist, you're an author, you're on a record label. So is that also why you want to be so flexible in the different fields, so you can channel all those interests?
This kind of flexibility, this is a kind of freedom what I achieved over many years. In the beginning it was quite, let's say, quite difficult, because when you do too much different things, people don't trust your work anymore. And maybe this was one of the reasons I chose a pseudonym in the beginning, because I not wanted to be connected to my visual arts. And it's still, until today, some people don't know that Carsten Nicolai is the same person as Alva Noto. But I enjoyed this kind of anonymity. In this time, I really believe that it's not about building up a typical art or artist career with a big name. At the same time, I grew up, of course, up when techno movement came on, and it was very normal to use pseudonyms almost for every record. I mean, my friend Atom TM has probably 62 different artist names. Also. So it was a very normal, let's say, habit in this time.
And was it good to play with the people's expectations as well?
Yeah, expectations came much later, when you basically delivered a certain stereotype, and then expectations come, and then when you feel like people are expecting a certain thing, then you get a little bit bored. Then you're trying to break it or do something completely different. Yeah.
But Carsten Nicolai went to become a landscape architect in the early 90s, is that correct?
Yeah, 85 to 90 years.
When was this breaking point where you said, I want to actually work in the creative field? Was there a specific turning point?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in East Germany, and basically we had to make a decision what we want to study quite early. In the age of 16 or 17, we needed to know what we want to come, and of course I didn't know exactly what in the future I will do. I got this wonderful book, What You Can Study. And I was reading every page, and then I thought, landscape design, I never heard of that, want to try this. And then what is basically architecture, and then I think this architecture idea you can still feel in my work. There's a certain kind of architectural ideas, even how I handle sound. And I believe sound can be architectural applied as well, but this landscape design basically was, we've been trained to create completely new landscapes after daylight coal mining system. Like we had this huge destroyed landscapes, and we've been trained to recreate completely new landscapes from scratch. And so we learned a lot of different fields, and in order to communicate and bring people together. And maybe this approach, like being not interested only in one specific thing, this I kind of still, maybe it comes from that kind of study. Yeah.
But it's still a long way when you decide that you want to work as an artist, than actually being out there and people recognizing your work. What were those first steps?
I did already art in the time I studied.
Okay.
Yeah, but I showed with, I mean, so-called underground galleries, my things, and I just wanted to finish the study in the end in order to do the real thing. And as I finished 1990, this was the perfect moment, because this was the moment the wall came down and the world was open, and in this moment everything was possible. And then, yeah, I did my study, my parents been happy, and so, so I could start doing what I wanted to do. Yeah.
Then you said that you basically were part of the techno scene, at least you got exposed to that music, you were interested in visuals. What made you decide that you want to create your own visuals and not have somebody else do the visuals like we saw early on, and that you could focus more on the music? Would have that been too boring for you?
Yeah, I mean, when you work with sound, like how I started, like really simple oscillators and so on, you're realizing that, or let's say differently, when you perform, it was a very boring situation, let's say, because most of the time people behind a laptop, until today like this, I think, but doing something where people have no idea what they're actually doing. So, and I was thought, okay, I not want to pretend I'm performing here. I thought maybe the sound should perform. And one of the idea was basically to analyze the sound, to use classical sound analyzers, or to build my own analyzers, and let the sound really make the visuals. What of course is very practical, because every sound can produce a very different image. Yeah. So I was bringing some examples. It was a very early idea around 2000. I basically connected CD players to TVs and did very high frequencies, and realized that the TV is interpreting the audio signal as a video signal, or like they're thinking it's a video signal. And was very lucky to have some TVs. And today is very difficult because they switch mostly off and they not recognize a proper signal. I did one piece called Telefunken, and I show a little movie here where basically I created a sound, and the sound is the same sound as the input, basically, of the TV. So the sound you hear is actually as well the sound, what is the signal for the TV. Yeah, I mean, there's a short example in some video stills here, but this was one of the starting points, and until today I use this kind of principle, where I was really interested, what can sound express, what kind of image it can produce even without have a narrative, or when you look at the previous talk, because basically it's a kind of narrative or interpretation of the song or of the lyrics, and since I just produced very clean electronic, or let's say test tone oriented stuff, it was very easy to create figures with that kind of analyzers. Yeah.
So you were basically using the visual instrument to create the sound for you as well. So
yes.
How sometimes some artists make a big deal out of doing music with robots, or even 30 years ago, you were using TVs.
Yes. Then later on, I applied that principle to, there's a small clip that's around the same period. I just play this one. This is just a blue screen of a normal TV, and I just modulated the audio track on top of the video signal, and then since you cannot record that proper, it's recorded with a camera, and the camera has a frame rate and it produces artifacts on top. But so there's no kind of programming involved or anything. It's really analog, very simple analog principle what I kind of applied. Yeah.
So how much is random or trying out in your work? Just finding things, looping.
I think it's let's say the error or the failure is a big inspiration for me, because using wrong signals or using understanding that the signal can be basically applied to not just the classical standard or something that of course produce a lot of failures, a lot of, I destroyed a lot of equipment, of course, by trying out things what I thought might work, and I had a huge collection of burned out speakers in my studio, because basically all the tweeters being gone. That's part of the process, of course. Yeah.
So it's, for me, interesting to hear that there's actually a lot of error involved in the production, because I assume that you are always, or a lot of times, perceived as a very German artist with very precise grids and engineering, almost like. So how do you approach that? Do you laugh about that when people perceive you as that?
Yeah, of course, probably you have this kind of German idea to get it in control, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
The error is very welcome in a kind of research process, but then when you want to present something, you of course not want to fail.
Mm-hmm.
You have to make it work somehow, and that's actually more difficult than to bring something in a stable condition that you can maybe perform it or show it.
You were talking about your live sets earlier on, that of course you're using a laptop as well, but what do you do differently? What kind of other equipment do you use in your live sets?
Depends on each performance, let's say. Most of the time I use very generic software, what everybody uses, but let's say, many times I try to write as well, or to create software what can do specific things, very simple stuff, or for the visuals, for instance, in my studio with a programmer together, we program, or sometimes we make the software to make specific things happening. And what you have to understand is, of course, when you're using normal software, what is around, you're always in the framework of that software. And sometimes you have idea what go beyond that, and then you're realizing, okay, I cannot achieve that idea with this kind of software, so you start creating it by yourself. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, and you're obviously doing a lot of collaborations with, one is with Blixer Bargeld or Ritchie Sakamoto. You have an organic element in your production. How do you combine that then? Obviously that's not an error.
Yeah, you asked me earlier, but basically the idea was in the beginning to stay very pure on electronic sound, but after maybe a few years I started a collaboration with Ritchie Sakamoto. I think he was very interested in a remix from my side, and I did as well this remix, and he was very happy with that mix. And I was very interested in his piano, because as well he sent me so much material, a lot of electronics, but I was not so much interested in that field what I basically already into. I was more like interested in breaking it with something, and as the piano came inside, I think in this time maybe nobody thought that the music in this time I was recording under Noto is even music, because many people thought, this is just sound experiments, let's say. But with this combination you realize that these sounds have a very strong musical content too. And I think this kind of contrast created something what being quite surprising, let's say. And it came another element, like a human element inside. And but what you understood is that even this very pure sine wave test tone ideas have a very clear musical content too.
And so far you've recorded various albums with Ritchie Sakamoto, but in the beginning, I guess the feedback wasn't all positive, because you were seen more as an electronic artist, having this organic element then, and I guess a lot of people didn't quite understand what this was all about all of a sudden.
Yeah, I think what is happening when you're recording in such a small, narrow band or interest, you're meeting a lot of people worldwide who have similar interests, and then it becomes kind of group. There's in Japan Ryoji or like Mika from Pansonic, and there's a huge list of names, friends. We all met in festivals, and you're realizing there's a community, there's a following, and of course, then to involve something, you have the idea. Okay, this is kind of, we're all working on one specific, varying, maybe avant-gardistic idea. We want to change the perception of sound, or this is the future, or something. And then I'm involving a piano. So, of course, I think this was for some people a step back, let's say, and was very critical. Many people were being very critical. But the main force, or the main idea, was not basically to break it. It was just simply that I really liked it in this time to produce it. The first album was sitting almost 2 years on a hard drive before it got released, because I was so unsure about it. So and then we put it out, and from that point on, it kind of developed into these 5 albums we recorded together and had many live shows. Yeah.
And now you have many other artists like Moritz von Oswald collaborating with Niels Werder Moorwehr, or other artists coming from the more electronic field, or even techno, collaborating with organic jazz musicians.
Yeah, maybe I show.
You said you have a video of the performance.
I have one of the shows we did last year in London. So what you can see here, of course, is not only that we play the music as well. There's a stage design, there's idea how to present with the desk and the screen, and the software with the LED screen and so on. I mean, it's like a classical production for how to present, for instance, such an album in a live context.
And what is programmed and what is actually performed live in that way?
Especially this piece is totally free, because it's a real improvisation, and all the software is real time. It's not video content. It's all based on analysis of sound. Ritchie uses a specific piano what has a synclavier function as well, what can give out MIDI. Whatever he plays, we're getting the signal. So this is, let's say, it's very easy to, in a way, because you get a lot of data and informations, but you just have to apply to the software. And I think this was always a very important fact for me, that you have a maximum of flexibility, that basically you can change. You can play 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever. A lot of preparation, let's say, but when you created that kind of instrument, I would say, then you have only to learn how to play it. Yeah. Yeah.
I've got a more private question. I read that you are synesthesian. I'm synesthesian as well, and I wanted to ask you if you use your synesthesia with your work.
How's your synesthesia? What exactly?
The synesthesia?
Yeah, for you, what do you experience?
I see waves and I see colors.
Okay.
I see bass lines more round, and the hi-hats more, wie sagt man, zackig.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't have that. I mean.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of written material where people say I have it, but actually I don't have it. So
okay.
Sometimes I have a very clear idea what each sound could draw, but this comes mostly back from these analyzers.
Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a long history about artists applying specific colors to specific tones or specific shapes, from Kandinsky on and so on. I know, of course, these books, but I don't have this kind of immediate feedback.
Oh, it's a pity.
So.
Because when I see your work, I feel like somebody understands me. So I thought maybe you see the same things as me.
Yeah, but but maybe it comes a little bit from what I said earlier, that basically I'm trying really to let the sound draw the things. Let's being even surprised myself sometimes. I mean, I have a great example of another collaboration with Ryoji Ikeda, basically using a phase analyzer, XY scope. It's a little bit difficult to explain, but what this device is measuring frequencies of the left and the right channel, and the difference of the wave. If a wave is, if it's a mono signal, just see a line. If the signal is basically, the wave is a little bit out of phase, then you start seeing circles and so on. And I have a video here. What is really, I think it's a great work. We started this 14 years ago. Yeah, I mean, just the complex.
Yeah, but that could be similar like what I see. So I thought maybe you see the same, but okay.
Yeah, maybe watching this kind of stuff for 14 years.
So what is different when you collaborate with other people? And that, I mean, except for that, you're obviously more than one person.
I think what is very important in a collaboration is, or the main purpose is that you do something what you're not able to do alone, basically.
So maybe you can talk us a little bit through your production process. Obviously, you're trying out a lot with equipment and sounds, but once you've found that particular sound, how does it go on from there to become?
I show you my favorite software. It's audio test software. Basically, what you can do is you can basically define any what kind of frequency. We take a sine wave frequency because it's the most difficult to percept for us. I choose the frequency range of, let's say, the people think we're hearing. So it's going from 0 to 2,000 to 22,050 hertz. And now you can we can test two things. One thing, how good is the speaker system? And the other thing, what do you hear? Where basically you don't hear anything anymore. Let's try this.
The young people still hear something?
Okay, I just maybe you watch. There's a number here. There's a frequency. When you stop hearing, basically, then you know which frequency you don't hear anymore, and how damaged your hearing is already. I'm a little bit older, so maybe 14K is maybe...
I was going to say, since you love the high frequency, how is it for you growing old? I mean, just losing all of that. Where's your comfort zone now?
I like 12,000K in the moment a lot.
So there are trends. 2014 is kind of the 12K range. All right.
Yeah.
So,
but as well, when I start a track, for instance, and I want to create a bass drum or a very low frequency or whatever, I can basically render this out and say, okay, save it. Then I use an editor, and that's actually how I started. That's in the old days I used an editor called SoundMaker, what is a very small shareware program. So basically what you get is a line here, but you can zoom in, and then you see basically starting from 0 going up to 22K. And since I have only one hand here now, basically what I do is I just say, wait. Just take this away and just say, I'm just interested in this part. And maybe fade this a little bit out, and then I double it. It's very difficult. Let's see. Okay, so you have a sound, let's say. And then to make it, I mean, just to show you what I do then later on is I'm taking this in the same software and switch this off. Building a grid, and let's say, and this is just maybe that would be the sound I just chose, and then I place it. There's something else. But I start very simple, basically with that sound, and then I add more and more layers. So I just want to show you. But this takes very long, let's say. I just want to switch everything off here, let's say. Just go quick through and just switch everything on, so yeah. And so on. Yeah, and then becomes, when you basically have like a basic grid like this, then you think, okay, maybe this can become a track at some point. Yeah.
Do you ever feel tempted to use preset sounds?
No. Except one.
The kick drum.
The kick drum. The 808. I don't know what magic is in this kick drum, but we're all gonna figure out.
Well, it's a machine, so.
Yeah. I don't know.
Not a sample.
There's a lot of theory about the 808 kick drum. Yeah.
What I wanted to ask is, it feels to me that, I mean, overlooking like the sound that came out of the 90s, the IDM, nowadays, the sort of like sounds that were really pioneered by people like you, other people from, you know, all the warp artists, whoever, I mean, like, a huge list, now are really common. I mean, like any sort of usual bro step, Skrillex sounds, uses stuff that was pioneered by, you know, I don't know, whatever, Aphex Twin or Tecra, you, whoever. Do you think that they're going to use stuff like that, like the circles that you just did? Is it something that you're aspiring to get it more widespread use, or is it something that are you looking for just more very specific technical weird things?
Yeah. But there is, of course, there is a kind of what you understand, of course, when you do music. Music is a kind of social phenomenon. People, I mean, I listen to pop music, of course, as well. And I think I'm always very happy if, for instance, when you say that this sound is now used into like pop production or whatever, and I think that's what I was always hoping. What is going to happening, right? I mean, if you imagine, as Kraftwerk released the first album, what became a hit in America and had a huge influence on basically electro in general, and of course of the whole black music scene. This is something what I really think should happen. I think this is something what's really interesting when people who work experimental, when things get picked up and become a part of our culture in a way. Yeah. And I think as well it's a feedback system, because sometimes you can steal from them too, right? You can say, okay, great tune, good riff, or it grooves. Like, yeah. I get really, I mean, like, I have a big love with old funk records or something, when the all this incorporated idea of beats and so on comes from that. And if I hear a song what is grooving, I look very carefully how it's done. Yeah.
When you started doing that sound experiments, and you didn't consider yourself as a musician, what did you thought actually it was that you were doing? Is there like any? How would you define it? How did you define it at that time?
Yeah, I think the word musician is very difficult, because I not wanted to offend basically people who really are serious trained musicians, and I felt always I have much more freedom and less expectations, and when I'm not trying even to pretend I'm a musician. I mean, there was a really great moment when I started working with Ritchie Sakamoto, and he was basically telling me, this is BPM, and this is 4/5 bar, and actually we in D. So, and I was saying, okay, the loop length is 0.5 milliseconds. I'm working on 50 hertz, and actually my grid is 16 grid, and so I had basically. What you're realizing is the notation system, what we learn in school, or what everybody is using. It's a kind of language where it's a common language, people can communicate. But somehow, because I started so difficult or so weird, I developed my kind of more technical language, and maybe this gave me a little bit of freedom to do things what basically it's not in the notation system so easy to do, because each of that notation system is already, a language is defined, and in the moment you use a defined language, you of course have the limitation of it, right? So I was quite happy that I don't know all these kind of things. Maybe that's the reason I'm trying to avoid the classical term of composer or musician. I hate categories as well. I really have difficulties.
You come from
do not want to choose
stuff,
another one
so
for this
kind of your
face meter
of music,
and
you do not change.
What about the aesthetics
to a 606
play with
a piano player?
So do you,
when you look at the Yamaha piano or a Steinway, you have an own aesthetic of sound. Do you select your oscillators and your stuff to compare with it? You mentioned the magic of the 808. So you do not want to choose another one for this kind of track of music, and you do not change it to a 606 or something. So do you bring sound aesthetics to your synthesizer oscillators?
Actually, I don't own 808, to be honest, but I don't have so much outboard hardware. Let's say I always try to start from the scratch. Like I try not to use like classical synthesizers, and if I use it, then the first thing what I do is I'm recording it and I'm putting it back into an editing program and just look what I really like and select again. And I have a little bit problem with real-time instruments, for instance. I'm simply, maybe it's the working process I'm used to, that I have to go back and touch it again in order to know that's really what I want. So that's yeah.
More the programming than in the real-time development.
Yeah, I mean for live shows there is software, but you need real-time programming, of course. But for like in the studio environment, I really like to go back and do it offline and yeah.
So you said that there's also, I mean, you're obviously doing the visuals who are connected to your music, and but then there are also analog elements that you use in the video production. I mean, when you did a track, for example, or a video for one of your Alva Noto tracks,
yeah.
You used not only frequencies.
Yeah, basically, I can show you the visualizing, but the sound of the stripe. I show a little video. I using now in combination of as well of programming, working with program software. So this is actually like a kind of hybrid where I'm using an analog device, like a hack device, hacking the video projector itself, but at the same time the image behind is completely programmed. It's a little bit difficult to see, but I show you some other still images of that software. Basically, this is the software running behind. And it is basically a program from a Canadian company. They approached me and we developed this together, where you can see how the signal chain goes, what exactly which audio signal produces what kind of frequency. And each of that windows can basically, you can zoom in the live performance and you can become like one main window. So this is a lot of examples of that main windows, all basically driven by audio analysis in different ways. And this I call uniscope because it collects many different kind of scopes, more or less. And this is, yeah, these are all the different kind of, and on top of that, I used this kind of hacking device where basically you manipulating the video projector straight with audio. What I never tell anybody actually, because they get scared.
What do you look for when you look at other artists? What defines for you a good performance or a good artistic piece?
Sometimes it's a simple piece, sometimes I'm really struck by simplicity or like a simple idea. Sometimes I admire great piece. Maybe some people saw it, The Clock from Christian Markley, where basically it's an installation piece, but as well as about time and about image, and I think it's about sound, of course, too. Or I think there's many kind of things what I like, but I don't take that as a kind of one-to-one inspiration. I mostly get inspired that people have the ability to create something what is maybe, basically makes you stop breathing for a second. Yeah, I think that kind of moment, and that if you see this kind of things, then as well it gives you a lot of energy to move on and maybe do the next step. Yeah.
Two other artists that give you that moment?
One of my favorite artists, and he was never called an artist, is Nikola Tesla. And people know him, probably will know what I mean. And or Buckminster Fuller, people basically from totally different background, or like pioneers, Visual Guys, or Nam June Paik, early Nam June Paik stuff, or I mean, there's a huge list of pioneers I could mention now.
You also run a label, Raster Noton. So when you look at contemporary artists, what you're looking for when you sign someone to your label?
We're running with Olaf Bender, Raster Noton, and since more than 15 years now. I think we decided that we very specific. We have a certain kind of aesthetic, and I think if we feel like people kind of belonging to the family, let's say, or they do something what is really like interesting, or then it's difficult to say when you start liking something. Mm-hmm. But most of the time you have a feeling that, or you see a show of someone. When I saw Empty Set the first time, I was blown away, and I was thinking, wow, great, fantastic, and then most of the time we're not signing. We just say, if you ever need somebody who wants to put it out, think on us, and with a lot of these people we become friends.
And with Olaf Bender, you also do the Project Diamond version,
mm-hmm.
and you've just been supporting Depeche Mode on their European tour. How was that?
Funny. We played with them 7 times, and I watched 7 times the show, and I didn't get bored. Let's say that was a good sign as well. And I was very happy, basically, to. The video directors before said sometimes you get offers from people you don't like, but in this case it was absolutely fantastic, because we really, of course, respect their career and their music.
I have a question about your remixes. You call them rework. I want to ask, what's the difference between rework and remix, and is it more conceptual or technical?
Very easy, because in the very early days, remix has been basically that you're mixing a track basically different. But in these days now, I think people take it much further. I mean, sometimes a remix I end up only using one sound or like a very little piece, so I thought it's not really remix actually. It's not that I'm getting the audio tracks and mix it differently. The word remix, nobody takes it so serious anymore, but I thought in the beginning, maybe I call them remodels, and then I kept on doing this. Yeah, very easy.
I was wondering, actually, to me, I think all your work and the art, and actually I call it music, seems very determined, and it kind of reminds me of other musicians that actually, to me, have a similar approach to what they do, which means very radical, sometimes very abstract, And me personally, I very often think about jazz musicians like, I don't know, John Coltrane, free jazz, maybe even noise. And I was wondering, to me that sounds like coming from a completely different direction, but ending up at a similar point at the end of the day. Whereas obviously John Coltrane, for example, coming from a very organic and very harmonic-based approach. Is that something that you kind of think of or that you kind of relate to when you design or, I don't even know, compose your music or your work? Think about these kind of musicians. You just a couple of minutes ago said you always try to start from scratch, and I think that's a sentence and an approach that you can find very obviously in avant-garde or in, I don't know, free jazz music. Is that something that plays a role in your work?
I'm happy you're asking this because in East Germany we had an incredibly strong free jazz scene, and this was actually very internationally connected already. And for some reason, there's been a lot of exchange, a lot of international exchange. So I grew up with free jazz, been to so many free jazz concerts in my life very early. Until the point I really thought, okay, this musician have really fun, but I don't like it anymore. But I always could see the fun of the musician, and I mean, of course, when you work in such a strong framework, sometimes I get very often reminded on this kind of wild free jazz, let's try something out moments, because it's a kind of, sometimes you need this kind of polarity in the work, that you basically break it, or that you try to do something else, or just have not a knob in front of you or a computer and just improvise or whatever. And I think this is kind of necessary as well in order to just break yourself, break the perspective, and yeah.
Since you work a lot with a particular kind of frequency, did you ever never had the need of modify or create a particular speaker or sound system? And generally, if you have to take in account of the acoustic environment where you do a performance, or the spatial positioning of the...
Yeah, I tried a little bit developing our own speaker system, but more in an installative way. I did a kind of, I call it a speaker system, but it's kind of architectural object. And this was actually basically a speaker what was reacting very specific, and it's an object, it's an architectural object as well. And you can see the surface of that object is the speaker itself, the floor is the speaker. So I have this idea sometimes, and when I, for instance, it's more like in the installative work, I need only one specific frequency. I really just choose the speaker who only can produce that frequency. I don't need a full range system or something. So that's, of course. But in a performance context, I think you have to work with the speaker system who are available. I have a nice tech writer where I tell the people what PA I like, and there may be 5 alternatives. And luckily, I think in the last years, speaker system became better and better. I mean, always very happy. Because what you have to understand is, as an electronic musician, you are your instrument is not the computer only. It's not the mixing board. It's the speaker too. The speaker is basically part of the instrument. It's the resonance body. It's actually where things happening as well. And I think this is, if there's any promoter here in the house, I think please remind this. Provide the musician good speaker systems, please. Yeah.
Okay, so as a final, we'll watch a video that you did for a track by yourself, and it was shot in an analog way.
Yeah, it's a bit unusual, and maybe this is what I said earlier. I always try to break things, so there is no...
Not only speakers.
Yeah. There is no, this time, no generative or hacking involved. This is it's more like a video clip in a way, like a little movie.
...61, 80, 33, 98, 87, 49, 89, 48, 48, 20, 45, 86, 83, 43, 65, 63, 81, 17, 72, 03, 09, 76, 52, 17, 05, 75, 17, 97. 05, 67, 83, 00, 22, 87, 85, 69, 97, 82.
Thanks a lot, Carsten Nicolai, Alva Noto.